All right. How is everybody? What day is it today? Tuesday my time, so it must be Monday morning for all of you guys. Monday, don't understand that. Monday evening. How is everybody? Look, so basically how these Q&As work. Yeah, get some more light in here actually. Basically, join the Slido. Open up a window. Natural light, we'll go with that. Let me know if the music is too loud in the YouTube comments. But basically, how these Q&As work, you just join the Slido, you join that Slido number, or you use the QR, and you just hop right in and start asking questions. This is going to be fun, given my last video. I tickled a few feathers there. We'll see what questions come through. Does anybody need this QR code thing? I mean, surely you can just type in, you guys can just type in a website, right? Because I just want to like be able to see all the questions. Does this work? Barely. I can barely fit myself in. We'll give that a shot. At least that way, if I'm looking over here, I can... It's kind of like I'm looking at the screen that you guys are asking questions on. So this should be good. And remember also how it works is you can like other people's questions and that'll bring them to the top. And then I'll answer them first. and so the shitty questions will be answered towards the end of the video. Otherwise, it'll just be first come, first serve. All right, I might as well just start answering the questions. If the music is too loud, let me know. I might turn it down a little bit just because it might be overpowering my voice, and some people will want to be listening to my voice rather than just some random background elevator shit. Okay. This one. Can I lay out the simp versus multi-size argument from the Ask Thomas channel in the Discord? Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty broad question, because like a lot of people don't even have the understanding to even get to the question. What's going on is, g'day JG. What's going on between the simp and this multi-size thing is people are like trying to actively simplify the game, right? And as a result, they're missing out on a lot of resolution to what they're doing. So say for example you're a particular poker player that uses four bet sizes at each node, but instead of you know, mixing between those sizes, right, you just pick one of the bet sizes that you like best and play your entire range accordingly. So say for example your bet sizes are 25, 50, 100 and 200, right? And those aren't unreasonable bet sizes to choose, but the fact that you're only picking one of those sizes at each node and then playing a range afterwards will cause you to just lose EV. Certain hands will prefer a slightly bigger bet size, and certain hands will prefer a slightly smaller bet size. So effectively, the only split that you're allowing yourself is to split between betting and checking, right? And the bet size is chosen beforehand. This way of playing just ignores your hand EV, right? Ignores your hand EV against the opponent that you're playing against. Because in reality, and how the game is actually played, the EV of your particular hand depends on your opponent's strategy and the line that you take within your opponent's strategy. So given your holding, right, the two cards that you hold, and your opponent's strategy, right, if you know exactly how they'll play at every node that they're given, you will quite quickly and easily be able to calculate which of the lines to take, and just pick you just play the hand exactly to the best line, which maximizes your EV across your opponent's strategy, right? And that will be given a particular bet size, right? You're going to have particular bet sizes that will at each node that will maximize your EV for that particular hand, and then because you've maximized your EV for each hand that you play against your opponent's strategy, your entire range EV is maximized, because the range EV is just the weighted average of your hand EV, right? So you have a particular range, right? You want to maximize the EV of your range. You maximize the EV of your range by maximizing the EV of every hand within your range. And in order to maximize the EV of every hand within your range, you need to pick the best line for that hand given your opponent's strategy. So that basically means you're picking the best bet size that you think that plays best with this hand given a particular opponent or opponents if you're playing multi-way. So the simpers, the simps, they just they're doing it completely wrong. They don't understand that the range EV is just the same as the hand EV, right? And that the EV of a particular bet size has really you can just pick a bet size for a particular hand rather than having to pick a bet size for a range or whatever. And so essentially what the simps will do with this whole idea of picking the bet size before picking the range, as I said previously, like if you do it in a way that if you do it in a way where you're picking the full bet sizes 25, 50, 100, and 200, and you pick the bet size before you look at your hand, right? You pick the bet size for the range before you look at your hand, and then you're forced to play that bet size with that hand. You're essentially capping your own strength as a poker player, and the poker player that I just described that does this and does it probably reasonably well is Poker Snowy, and everyone worth their salt in the poker community knows that Snowy is a bit shit. So and the reason why Snowy is shit is because it can't split sizes. I mean, Snowy's preflop strategy is still stronger than most beginner and intermediate players, but the fact that it can't use multiple preflop sizes and the preflop sizes that it does have a far too spread apart just means that it ends up doing really weird shit preflop. And then even though it can pick a decent size on the flop, that doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be able to compete against very strong players that know how to use multiple bet sizes against it. And then you have the question, okay, so we know that that simping is wrong, that being a simp is just wrong. How do you exploit them, and how much and how exploitable are they? It turns out across a variety of simulations that I've run, and I'll probably do a whole video on it at some stage, a whole like pre-recorded video on it at some stage, that simping will usually is exploitable by more than like 10 BB per 100. It's fairly, that's just on the flop, and then if you include like pre-flop simps as well, and then the combination of simping pre-flop plus simping post-flop, it ends up being super exploitable by in the order of more than 10 BB per 100. So Super Witch, if you can ask in the Slido, just like go to that slido.com and then you type in that number, you'll be able to ask questions. And I'm gonna make sure that the questions that are asked in the Slido are answered first, because that way it's fair for everybody. And if your question is good, other people will like it, and then that'll bring up the answer. Who the fuck is calling me? Okay. All right. Never mind that. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Anonymous. If I didn't make that clear, then try and answer a more specific question. Ask a more specific question, then I'll give you a more specific answer. All right. JG. Will JG reach high stakes? I mean, only if he wants to. If JG wants to put the effort in to like become a really good poker player, he can play whatever fucking stakes that he wants. Like anyone can get really good at this game if they put the effort in. Like you need to learn the right stuff and then put the effort in to actually outplay your opponents. And this goes back to the simping thing, right? If you're simping, you end up just capping the strength of your own play by a lot, and then like you end up, learning the wrong things. So yeah, JG, because you're in Zenith, I mean, I don't see any problems with. I don't see anything that would prevent you from playing 2K NL, 5K NL, 10K NL over the next year or two. As long as you don't fucking Dunning-Kruger yourself like you have a couple times in the past. Just stay humble, man. Stay humble, bro. What are the highest stakes that I've beaten? I'm pretty sure I've beaten like 7 trillion, 14 trillion on Zinger. I mean, that's pretty high. Yeah, thanks, Hydra. How much time do you spend on each sim when studying? It's so easy to spend forever on the minutiae. Yeah, so this is a good question. Like, I generally think that studying breadth over depth is a very important thing to do. So when you're studying, right, you're never going to be able to spend like 10 minutes studying per each sim, because like each individual sim, you're not going to be able to wade through all the minutiae. You can study each sim for 10 minutes, but then if you do that, you'll end up, spending 4 hours on a database. And then I've got like 200 databases in early access right now. So, I mean, you do the math. You end up quickly exploiting out the amount of time that you need to put into it. So in terms of each sim, I think that the first time that you look at it, right, try to get a good overview of what's going on. Don't spend too much time digging into the minutiae. Okay, digging into little stuff is not going to improve your EV and the way that you play anywhere near as much as just having some broad strokes overviews. So that means that every time that you see a database, so you take an entire database, say for example, you look at a particular formation preflop, right? That particular formation preflop in my early access stuff has 15 databases associated with it, right? And each of those databases has like 20 to 25 sims on average. So if you put an hour into each database, it's already 15 hours studying a particular spot. If you're studying a particular spot for 15 hours, you're going to get way better than your opponent at that formation who hasn't studied that formation in any kind of depth, right? And then you move over to the next formation. So the answer is you're probably only going to spend 2, 3, 4 minutes on each flop within the database, because you probably don't want to spend more than an hour looking at each database in a formation, because then it becomes diminishing returns. You're going to get the most returns by spending a little bit of time on it, right? An hour probably for each database, and then work your way through the whole set of databases. And then the second time that you look at it, that's when you go into a bit more detail, right? So the first time that you look at something, you're not looking at it for detail. You're looking at it as an overview, right? So that the next time you see that spot during your play, you'll be able to have an idea of what's going on. So thanks, Anonymous. All right, why are they simping at high stakes? What stakes? What happens when you're playing excellent players where balance is important and multi-sizing makes that more complicated? Look, I mean, balance is always important, but it's not quite as important as people make it out to be, right? The reason why like there was a lot of simping in the past is because of the limits of computation, right? And that's not saying that, people basically aren't willing to drop 10, 15, 20 grand on a bunch of computers to run a whole lot of calculations when they can just like run stuff on their laptop and get a quick answer. So people don't like the fact that you know, in order to really have a good idea of what's going on in a single raise pot, you have to run a sim for 4, 5, 10 hours. When they want the answer now and they can just, you know, simplify it and get a half-baked answer in a few minutes. The issue is when they go and then apply that to what they're doing in game, what they're doing in terms of their study off the table, right? They're just capping their own relative strength. And in terms of like what's going on with a lot of these high stake players is that they're really just trying to exploit the shit out of each other, and you know they won't play against other high stakes players or other strong high stakes players unless there's a whale at the table or whatever. Which is unfortunate, right? Like the reason I don't share my own screen name and stuff is because, you know, as soon as people know that, people will no longer want to play against me, right? Anyway, remember to like the video, guys, and like the other questions, and when those questions will be answered first. Will I play heads up for rolls against MMA? I don't even know who MMA is, so I don't know why I should play heads up for rolls against him. How do you execute a mixed RFI strat? On the button, it looks like every hand is 7.5%, 2.75, 60%, 2.5, 25%, 2.25, etc. Exaggeration. What do? Look, the multi-size open strategy is really only necessary when you don't know what your opponent, how your opponent is going to play against each of those sizes. If you have some idea about what your opponent is going to do, then in reality, what you can do is just pick one of those sizes that you think is best against the opponent that you're playing. And usually that just means raising your stronger hands to a bigger size and your weaker hands to a smaller size. And I tend to do that a lot. So thanks, Anonymous, for that question. All right, so Super Witch, yep, thanks for moving a question from the chat to the Slido. Okay, does the flop donk gain much EV? Yes. It gains a lot of EV pre-flop because a lot of hands that it means that your pre-flop calling range doesn't quite have to be so capped, right? The reason why like there's not a lot of donks in play is because of the asymmetry between the two ranges. So say for example you're out of position calling in the big blind against an in position open, right? The opener who is in position has opened, you know, into so many players, right? Many more players than you in the big blind are defending against, right? So there's an asymmetry in the amount of knowledge that the two players have, right, pre-flop. So the opener doesn't know, you know, whether or not one of the, say for example you're in the low jack, you don't know whether one of the 5 players behind you has aces or kings or whatever other strong hand. So you have to play quite cautiously, and so you open a very tight range. But then when it folds around to you in the big blind, you know the players who folded don't have those strong hands, because if they had those strong hands, they would have played the hand, right? So that means that you're only defending against the low jack, and so you can defend a much wider range of hands against them. And so you end up getting this asymmetry between the calling range and the opening range, which causes the big blind's range going into the flop to be a lot weaker than the low jack's range. And so because they've got a much weaker range, that's why there's not so much donking on a lot of boards, right? So a lot of the time, adding a donk to the post flop, tree is not going to add any EV because the donk wouldn't be used anyway, right? But in the spots where there is flop donking, right, then yeah, you're going to increase the EV of your strategy, right? It goes back to the simplification thing again, right? The fact that you're splitting between donking and betting in a spot where you should have donked will improve your expectation. It's like saying if you don't want to donk, then like whenever you open the small blind against a big blind, like you're just going to check everything, which is just ridiculous. Because the small blind should be doing a lot of betting there, right? Like theoretically, like if you ran a sim where like you remove the betting, the ability for the small blind to bet, then like the range EV will be fairly similar to if you let the small blind bet. But then the individual hands, the EV of the individual hands is just way different, right? Like a lot of hands want to bet at least some of the time, and some of them will be check raising as well. So adding some donks, it might not be clear that it adds EV when you run a flop sim, but it does add EV when you run a pre-flop sim. Okay, Hydra is asking, how important is it to randomize when playing low to mid stakes? Should we focus more on doing the thing where we maximize the EV of our hand versus our range? Yeah, you should not be randomizing unless you don't know what's going on, right? If you don't have enough information to make a decision against your opponent, then you can randomize to the decision to basically put yourself in a spot where like you think are the best, right? Is the best line to take. So say for example, you have to choose between 2 or 3 bet sizes and you're not really sure what bet size to choose against the opponent, then that's where you randomize. You're not really going to be randomizing most of the time, because a lot of the time you can pick, at least you should be able to, as a strong poker player, you should be able to pick the size which works well with this hand against your opponent's strategy and your opponent's range. So it's not super important to randomize unless you really don't know which line to take. And then if you don't know which line to take, you would basically fall back on a strong strategy, which the equilibrium strategy is the strongest one of them. It's the strongest defensive strategy that you can take, and you might as well start from there, right? So if at equilibrium you're going to split between bet or check at a particular frequency, right? Then, and you don't know how to choose between those two because you don't know enough you don't have enough information against the opponent that you're playing, you would just fall back and choose the equilibrium strategy, and then you'd split between the two by randomizing. So thanks, Hydra. All right, Super Witch, how to study the off-tree lines. Like a GTO response to the GTO response to a line that's off the tree, like a non-GTO line, like a line that should be taken 0% of the time, is basically you're constructing a strategy such that the EV of each of the opponent's hands is lower than if they took the main line, right? So if they're taking a line that isn't taken at GTO, the best way to respond to that is to construct a counter strategy that reduces the EV of all their hands. But if you're talking about how to study an off-tree line in terms of a line that's outside the sim that you created, if it's outside the sim that you created, you're probably creating sims that are a little bit too small. So adding more bet sizes will be able to help out with that. Or if your opponent has chosen a size that's in between 2 sizes in your sim, then you should be able to reason logically what the best size, what the best counter strategy will be by looking at the 2 or 3 whatever similar lines to the one that your opponent has taken. So thanks for that question, Super Witch. Anonymous is asking, is simping just another word for bucketing? Yes. So when it's not really just another word for bucketing. It's a combination of bucketing in terms of using too few buckets and also reducing the size of your abstraction of the game to one that's too small, right? So the game is very large. I mean, technically it's infinitely large if you're allowed to use continuous bet sizes. But even if you just like round it down to the nearest cent or the nearest dollar or whatever, it's still going to be a very, very big game. And so what we're doing when we're using the sims, right? What we're doing when we're using solvers is abstracting the game by using game tree abstraction or bet sizing abstraction. And instead of, allowing the solver to bet every single possible bet size, you just choose a few of them to get a decent idea of what's going on in the hand. And then you can add or decrease the level of abstraction. Simping is basically running calculations that have an abstraction that might be able to, make sense for a particular person's mind to wrap their head around, but is far too abstract in the context of the real game. So the real game being much larger than their abstraction. So basically they're just going to lose EV because the model that they're looking at, the model of the game that they're looking at doesn't accurately model what's actually going on. And the point of modeling, the point of running these models is to get an idea of what's happening in reality. So if in this case the game is the reality, your model, right, the bigger the model, the closer that model is to reality, the better results you're gonna get. But if you're simping, then you basically intentionally create models that don't accurately model reality. So thanks. I think Julian asked that question. All right. With the vast amount of material, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and worse the more you learn. Any tips? Yeah, you should, when you're starting off, feel like you're a shit player with the amount that you learn, right? Like the reason why people like fall into the Dunning-Kruger stuff is because they learn some basic shit and then they think that they know what they're doing. The more that you learn, the more that you'll realize that you don't know shit about this game, right? Because the game is so enormous, right? So the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know, right? So you should feel overwhelmed, and that's okay. Just take out some bite-sized pieces and study a little bit here, a little bit there, and get some breadth under your belt in terms of the amount that you study. And you'll just get better and better the more hours you put in, right? No one became a monster at this game overnight. So just spend some time on each spot. Spend an hour on each database, right? Even just an hour a day, right? Looking at the sims, and you'll get better over time, right? You'll look back to how you played 6 months ago, and you'll think that you 6 months ago was an idiot, and you'll very quickly move up, very, very quickly, and the results that you get are going to be directly proportional to the amount of effort that you put in. So thanks, question Oscar. Hopefully that's sufficient. Most simpers agree simping loses EV. The argument is based on out of implementation. Aren't you worried about the difficulty of implementation of your strat? I mean, you can go and implement the strategy any way you want, right? Like, what's really going on when you're studying a bunch of sims is you're training your own intuition about the game, right? If you're studying stuff that's just wrong to start with, then your intuition is going to be wrong, right? You want your understanding of the game, you want your intuition to accurately model what's actually going on in the whole game. So the stronger your intuition is, the easier it will be for you to play a lot of these hands, and you'll be able to make decisions that are close to optimal, right? Then all of your decisions are always going to be slightly suboptimal, or at least the majority of them will be. So you just have to be able to minimize the amount of big mistakes that you're making, and the way that you minimize the amount of big mistakes you're making is to train your intuition on a lot of different spots, because the game is very big. Because the game is very big, training your intuition is a good way to do it. So yeah, train your intuition, and you do that by looking at sims that try to accurately model the game. And you're never going to get one that models it perfectly, but some are just better than others. And simping is, intentionally dumbing down, the model to the point that it just loses EV. And the reason why it's losing EV is because it's wrong. So if the simpers agree that their models are losing EV, then like there's something that's going on that's just incorrect. So why would you go and say something that's wrong? It's like going out of your way to study, I don't know, a book on chess or a book on backgammon that is, just easily disproven. Like you just wouldn't study that because it's wrong, right? And if you want to be competitive at this game, you need to study the stuff that's correct. And then the other part of implementation is the exploit stuff. The broader number of lines that you look at, the more you'll realize how far your opponents are playing from GTO, and you'll be able to, on the fly, come up with a lot of different exploits yourself, which can really put your opponent on the back foot. And very quickly, you'll end up in a particular spot where you have an advantage over your opponent because you're able to exploit them because you studied a broader variety of spots than they have. And so you just take the line which you think with your hand maximizes your EV against your opponent's strategy, right? That's the exploit. And you're never going to find that line if you only study one bet size on the flop or one bet size pre-flop, right? It's about studying multiple bet sizes so that you can understand that, okay, well, if I do this with this hand, my opponent is going to struggle, right? And my opponent's going to make a mistake against my hand, right? So I'm just going to take that line because the mistake that the opponent makes will bring me some EV on average, right? It wins me money on average. That's maximizing your EV for you there. So thanks, Anonymous, for that question. Will the future pre-flop getting better and better due to better computational power? Yes. Yeah, I mean, pre-flop requires a lot of resources. It's very resource intensive task, right? It's very resource intensive simulation to run. And because of those resources, those limited resources, the more that computation grows, the better and more accurately we're able to model the game, and so we'll get better pre-flop sims. And so like the sims that I ran 2 years ago, shit compared to the sims that I ran this year. So thanks, Super Witch. Okay, so I was asking, do you believe somebody simping could beat high stakes? If so, why do you say that the ceiling is capped? Edited. Do I believe someone simping could beat high stakes? Well, why do you have to make things hard on yourself, right? Simping just makes things more difficult on yourself in the long term. If you're going to play this game for a few years and you're actively trying to play high stakes, why would you study the stuff that you know is wrong and it's just going to put you in a worse spot than if you just study the stuff that that was correct to start with, right? Why do I say the ceiling is capped? Because like if you're studying a simplified model of the game, a model that's too simple, you just won't understand what's going on in the other lines, right? Part of studying as a strong poker player is not just studying the GTO line, but also studying lines which are a little bit off GTO, right? Studying the responses to lines that your opponent might take if they don't know what the correct bet size is, for example. So say, for example, you got 3 or 4 bet sizes on the flop, right? The solver might only choose 1 or 2 of them, but it's good for you to see how the opponent should respond to the other bet sizes, even if those other bet sizes aren't taken, because you might be able to pick up some EV by taking those other bet sizes, right? So you're then going to look at playing, turns and rivers in the main lines, but you're going to be looking at, choosing other bet sizes with particular hands, because your opponent might be making some mistakes there. So the way that you find those mistakes is by looking at the other bet sizes. And then like you're doing stuff like node locking as well, right? And sure you can node lock some simplified sims, but it's a lot easier for you to run a node lock on a sim that's already quite big, because you can either choose the ranges that the sim thinks to get there on the turn, for example, or you can put your own ranges in. You can do a lot of stuff with node locking if you have multiple bet sizes in your simulation, and then that will basically just help you play the correct way with against a particular opponent. Now, one caution about node locking is that if you node lock, the simulation will be able to try and compensate for that particular mistake. So say you node lock a particular flop strategy, the solver will try to compensate for that mistake on the turn the river. Other things that you can do with node locking is copying and pasting strategies from other sims and stuff. That's a bit complicated. It's a bit outside the scope of what I want to get across here. But with node locks, you need to be a little bit cautious about what you're doing, especially on the earlier streets, because the sim will try to compensate by playing more correctly, or try to compensate for the flop mistake by playing differently on the turn of the river. So if you're patient enough to go through and node lock all the turn strategy or whatever, then you'll get a more accurate node lock for that particular opponent. With the existence of better RTA and the vast majority of knowledge online, do you think live poker will become preferred over online? Well, I mean, as RTA gets better, like the defense that poker sites can use against RTA will also get better, or at least it should. Just the same way that chess websites can quite easily detect people who are playing too well, right? People are playing according to particular computer outputs, right? Or getting some help from a computer player. They might not be able to figure that out while they're playing, but they'll be able to figure that out by analyzing some of the past chess games that they played. And so in these poker sites should be able to figure it out by looking at some of the past hands that that particular player has played, and then basically get a probability model and then ban them for the use of the RTA. And in terms of knowledge online, like I don't understand why knowledge online won't affect live play. Like live poker and online poker is the same game. It's just that worse players will play much bigger stakes live than they would online. And it's mainly because of the presence of like the oldies. So thanks Anonymous for that question. All right, how long have we gone for? 45 minutes. If you want to ask a question, guys, remember to go to the Slido. And so in the Slido, you join, you ask a question, and then you like other people's questions, and then those questions will move closer to the top. I'll answer them first. If I run out of time, I won't be able to answer all the questions. So I'll first answer the questions that have likes on them. Also remember to like the video, guys. Okay, I think we'll keep going. So Anonymous asks, what are the three most important spots to study from the button? Like the three most important formations. Well, probably you're going to be looking at button versus big blind in the single raise pot, button versus big blind in the three-bet pot, and button versus small blind in the three-bet pot. I mean, the question doesn't make a whole lot of sense because there's a lot of different formations to study, and there's a lot of different lines pre-flop that'll happen. I mean, in 6-max, other important lines are like the button flat lines. So looking at 2-bet pots after the button flats is also important. Looking at 3-bet pots after the button, 3 bets over the opener. That's also important. So thanks, Anonymous. Because of how revolutionary strategies are, don't you think it's important to show results of these strategies work? Other strats are results proven. I mean, like Zenith has multiple players that have moved from 10 NL to like 2K NL plus in a matter of 2 years. So like, I don't know if that's, you can just go into the Zenith group and just ask people what their results are from studying the stuff that I put out, right? You'll get loads of people saying they just destroy the stakes after they started studying Zenith and have had difficulty with stakes previously, right? The reason why people stick around and the reason why the Zenith Discord is so active is because the shit that we're talking about, the shit that we study, the shit that I teach actually fucking works. Right, like you jump into the Facebook groups of these other training sites, and they're just dead, right? There's just nothing going on. Like no one's really talking about anything. And then you jump into the Zenith Discord, and like it's very active all the time. And especially like given the ratio between like how many people are actually in those groups compared to like how much activity that's going on, there's a very, very shocking difference. So like if you're just like wondering like how quickly you can improve enormously quickly just by studying the right stuff and putting the effort in. And if you want evidence of that, just go into the Zenith group and just ask some players where they were 2 years ago and where they're playing now. Just ask that question. Andrew, if you want to ask a question, you need to ask it on the Slido, just because that makes it fair for everyone else. So yeah, thanks Donald for that question. Hopefully you go into the Zenith Discord and be respectful to people and just ask them how they were playing, you know, a year or 2 years ago and where they're playing now and what caused them to make that change. And you'll find your answer there. Because it's one thing to just like post a graph of a particular player going from, you know, of a particular player. Like say for example, a coach posts their own graph, right? That doesn't say anything for how their students are gonna fare given that coaching, given that strategy, right? It's one thing for a coach to be really good, but if they're shit at coaching or they're teaching the wrong stuff, right? Then they're just not going. Then the students just aren't going to improve. But if I can go and say that I'm not going to show anyone my results, but I can show the results of, you know, these 10 students who went from 10 NL to 2K NL within 2 years. That's a far more impressive, you know, resume than just some graph that I put up. Hope that makes sense. Anonymous, how do you adjust when someone is playing stupid far from equilibrium strategy, overbet barreling, probing on monotone boards, c-bet out of position on a range check board? Yeah, I mean, you can run the simulations and see what the GTO way to play against these players are. But a lot of the time, they're taking lines that should be very polar, or they're taking lines that need to be raised a lot. So overbet barreling, I mean, there's nothing wrong with overbet barreling because that should be as a part of an equilibrium strategy. Probing on monotone boards, I mean, I mean, a lot of these lines might fit in the equilibrium strategy. C-betting out of position on a board where they should be checking close to their range. I mean, the answer to that particular question is just to raise a lot and not fold, because their range the range that they're betting is too weak. And then when they check, what does that say about their checking range? You should just attack the checking range as well. So if they're just going to put money in without understanding what's going on with the ranges, or if they're just going to put money in and it doesn't mean anything, then you just pretend that money's already part of the pot and then you play accordingly. I mean, what? Okay. Learning machine, if you want sims, pre-flop sims or flop sims done, you're going to have to message me in the Discord. Yeah, so Anonymous, if you have a more specific question, you can answer that as well, but hopefully I've answered that reasonably well. One, it's going to be knowing what the equilibrium strategy is and knowing what the equilibrium counter strategy to a non-GTO to the non-GTO lines are, and the only way you can study that is by running a sim with multiple sizes and then looking at what's going on in those non-GTO lines. I probably will do a tutorial later on in terms of GTO defense against the non-GTO lines. And then the exploitative defense against the non-GTO lines as well, right? So, I mean, you're going to have to know both of them. One, the GTO response, and two, the exploitative response, depending on what you think your opponent is doing. So thanks, Anonymous, for that question. Okay. Where is the best place to obtain population data? The best place is in your own database. If you have your own database, like if you tracked all of your hands and you play like 100,000 hands, you got a nice database there. That should be enough to be able to gather information about the population you're playing against. Yeah, that's the best place for it. You can also ask in the Discord if other people are playing in the same pool, and like you can do database swaps. You analyze their database, they analyze yours. Okay, if a solver always picks a small size, but villain uses a large size, how do you determine the equilibrium response to the action that the solver never takes? So the equilibrium response is not necessarily going to be a single response, but it's a response that decreases the expectation of all of your opponent's hands to it changes their expectation of all your opponent's hands to an EV that's lower than the EV that they would have gotten if they chose the correct size. So if they're choosing the wrong sizes, there's a particular way to play in the remaining subtree that decreases the EV of all of your opponent's hands to an EV that's slightly less than if they choose the correct size. And there's going to be multiple, usually going to be multiple different ways of doing that. But the solver will just end up picking one particular way of doing it. So thanks, Anonymous. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, someone was asking if you apply multi-size preflop ranges against players who use only one size, will the responses to their RFIs be incorrect compared to sims with only one size? The issue with a lot of these sims which only have one size, they only have one 3-bet size as well. So like sure it's not going to be the most efficient way to exploit the opponent who opens a particular size, but it's still going to exploit them because you're going to be taking it's still going to somewhat exploit them because you're going to be taking on average 3-bets and stuff which are going to be outside of what they've simulated themselves. Does that mean that the multi-size preflop ranges will lose EV against a opponent that uses a single size? No, it usually gains a lot of EV against those people. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question. That one's been answered. Windows Poker network bomb servers. I mean, just yeah, just PM me in chat. Okay, last call for questions. I think gone for about an hour. Remember to like the video if you've enjoyed my answers to your questions. Remember to like the video. Last call for questions. And you can also like other people's questions. Yeah, so when you're asking a question, try to ask in the Slido. So then just because it makes it fair for everyone else. All right, we'll just work through some of these. What's the biggest trend I'm noticing in the game? I mean, a lot of people are starting to use solvers now and they just don't know what the solvers mean. Like the people who like to use the solver and like use only one size are the same people that didn't like using the solvers when they first came out. There's always this desire to hold on to the previous shit that they'd learned, rather than just, you know, accepting the fact that what you've learned in the past was always slightly wrong, and then applying sort of a scientific model to it, and then improving the way that you're playing by, okay, well, this thing that I learnt 2 years ago is now obsolete because this new piece of information came out, this new simulation was run, which obsoletes the previous stuff. And that's part of the reason why I give away all my stuff for free each year, because at the end of a year or so, that stuff is either already reasonably well known to everyone, or is going to be updated or improved on by another sim that I would run some shortly in the future, right? So the game is very big, but there's a lot of people really want to hold on to the old ways of doing things, which before solvers, the old way of doing things was to just like try to figure things out on the back of a napkin. Now there's solvers, and then people want to try to oversimplify the outputs because they don't understand where their EV is coming from. And if they don't understand where the EV is coming from, like there's no way that you can expect someone to use a solver and really get good at the game accordingly, right? Because then they're just memorizing, they're just trying to memorize what the solver is doing, which is not the best way to play the game. The best way to improve at the game is to try to understand how EV is actually calculated, and then learn from the solver by having the solver introduce to you particular lines that you find useful, right? And studying the lines and studying how the solver plays can give you some inspiration, can tune your intuition, and so when you do go and actually play against human opponents, you can just fucking destroy them. Anyway, sorry for that rant. Things to look for when going over your results / stats. Then you're talking about like database analysis, analyzing your own database. Like I put on the Zenith website. Let me just show it quickly. So there on the Zenith website, if you click on the training, you'll find somewhere that says database. It says analysis, right? So in the analysis course, there should be some database analysis stuff there. So there's a few videos, me just going over some of the students' databases. It says analysis and review, and it's got a microscope as the photo. Analysis and review, and then just click on the database analysis videos, and there's 3 or 4 good database analysis videos. Each one goes for like an hour or 2. Just combing through the results of a particular player's database, looking for mistakes and stuff like that. So thanks, Anonymous. I don't run a stable. What? What's the most efficient ratio study to play? 25-1L player aims of reaching the high stakes quicker. I mean, if you're aiming to reach high stakes quicker, you should study more than you play. So then, like, you'll end up getting like a 2-to-1 ratio in terms of study to play, if not more, right? And then, like, it's not just like about it's not just about playing, because, like, think about it this way. If you're grinding 25-1L and you're winning 4 big blinds per 100 hands, right? You're going to take twice as long to get to the same bankroll as someone that's winning at 8 big blinds per 100 hands, right? Or 3 times as long as a player that's winning at 12 big blinds per 100 hands, right? So if you think about it, if you could just study at a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio and become the player that wins at 12 big blinds per 100 hands, you're going to end up spending the same amount of time overall, except by the time you get to that bankroll, you're just a stronger player, right? Because you've already beaten the stake for 12 big blinds per 100 hands, or 8 big blinds per 100 hands, right? So that's the way that you should look at it. Do a lot of study and play just to, cement the stuff that you've learned. And then like if you're trying to actively grow a bankroll, the easiest way to do that is to actually just get good first and then play later. Alright, last couple of questions. So play on. Zinger. I don't know. I'm too tired of answering questions like this. Example, something say we'll talk about in the stream. Studying breadth over depth. I don't know. I think we've covered a lot of stuff. All right. Thanks for no more questions, guys. Thanks for joining me today. Evan's got a question in the YouTube. He didn't ask on the stream. I'll try to answer that quickly. It's an interesting one. Quit playing poker 6 months ago. 76 buy-ins below EV and 350,000 hands. How do you deal with this? No way Bankroll Management can save you from these swings and not the mental breakdown. I mean, if you're running 76 buy-ins below EV, that's pretty tough. If poker is too much on you mentally, right, that the game is like super swingy, so if the game is too much on you mentally, just don't play. Like, it's probably not the right game for you to be playing. If you can't handle swings like that, right? And like, it's also a lot easier to be able to handle these big downswings. If you're a winning player to start with, because then mentally, like, if you're winning at 10 big blinds by 100, and then you hit a downswing, and then your overall win rate drops from 10 big blinds by 100 down to like 5 big blinds by 100 because of the amount that you've lost. That's a lot easier to withstand mentally than someone who's break even and then going from 0 to -5 over that sample size. So yeah, in terms of bankroll management, like, I'm pretty conservative in terms of bankroll management, and I recommend a lot of people be very conservative with it. And so that usually means like 100 buy-in, you 100 buy-in for the current stake, and you're trying to get to 200 buy-ins that particular stake before you move up, kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, all these questions should have been asked in the Slido. Bankroll challenge, I got busy. Split your study time, look at everything. I mean, there's so much stuff you can study. It's really up to you what order you want to study it. All right, thanks, guys. Hopefully everyone enjoyed. Remember to like the video. I wonder how many trolls we'll get this time. See you on the next one.